We're very happy to have you all here today. We're going to talk about, this is the second workshop in this form that we're having as our task. And the idea is that we show you the assessment framework that we've come up with. And you as, well, service providers, experts in the field, give us feedback. This is basically what we want the most from you. So it's very, I mean, we also like to present our work, but we also very much like to hear what you think about it. So it was also important to set up this meeting such that everybody has the same kind of representation and we can see everyone. So yeah, sorry about that. But we're going to use the documents you see here for collaborating. It has a part that you can fill in later on with your feedback, but also just notes and comments and some information about the assessment frameworks also there. This is going to be put on the Ferris Fair website, the webinar, so it's being recorded now, so just be aware of that because of any privacy issues you may have. And in this document there's also a list of participants, so you can add your name there. It'll be great. So we're going to, I'm already sort of finished welcoming you, but that's okay. We'll do everything a little bit more quickly. Then we will look together. So then Marana and Patricia are going to help to look together at the different aspects of the framework we've come up with. And then we'll have, in between we'll have a break. So there's more like the more IT technical aspects, and there's the more socially inclined oriented aspects that we're going to talk about. At the end, I'll give a short summary of what we talked about, and yeah, looking forward to it. So Marana, can we please go to the next one? Yeah, well, I already explained most of this. So we're trying to see, okay, discuss the framework in depth because we have a couple of hours to do that. Identify gaps and opportunities for improvement. We could prioritize which one of these is more important to you, which one is relevant, which one do you think it's, I mean, we can give all kinds of, which one is good example for your service, which one from your point of view, what do you think about each point on each recommendation, each objective and each recommendation, and you know, any kind of, yeah, again, any kind of feedback's interesting. Marana, can we? Just very short, the Ferris Fair project has been going on since 2019 and it will end in early next year. Our task will end earlier in about, I think, in August or September, in the middle of and the end of summer, basically. 6 major partners in Ferris Fair is the Horizon 2020 EOSC 5C call, 10 million euros. It has there are 6 main participants. The one from the the one that's organizing our task is DANS. Sorry, not our task. Within the Netherlands is DANS. I'm not quite sure if it's on the level of the project how it exactly is. Maybe if we go to the next one. Yeah, the objective of our task has been, so I've taken over about a month or so ago, leading this task. Before me was a colleague of mine, and the other members of the task have been here longer, some of them since the beginning. Our objective is to supply practical solutions for the use of fair data principles throughout the research data life cycle. So the idea is to be able to foster fair data culture. I lost it. Is to foster fair data culture and give good practices that we can take up in order to make services more fair. And this is in line with the objectives of the European Commission expert group on fair data, which also talks about services that foster fair data. I'm not going to read the whole thing again because we're so late. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so for us, we have what we have put together is an assessment framework for data services that will help service owners to improve their services incrementally and simulate the interaction between the objects and the services in order to make this data, the data that's goes inside the services, more fair, and try to get everything to work together to make this possible, to make this fair data possible, specifically from the service point of view. We've also looked into software point of view, but I'm not going to elaborate that much on this today. We can go to the next slide. Yeah. So for this, we have had case studies. We've looked at a literature review. We've done a survey. We've done interviews, and we've come up with the kind of mapping that services are either enabling fair, or that means that they give the users an opportunity to make their data fair or more fair, or they respect fair, so kind of like fair in, fair out, whatever. They don't reduce the amount, they don't change the, well, if they put fair data in, it's going to stay at the same level of fair, or they might be reducing, which is not a good thing, because then you can put fair data in it loses metadata or something that comes out as less fair than before. We have published one first version of a deliverable, and also the basic, so the basic fair service assessment. We're going to publish at the end of the test, we're going to publish the final version of this deliverable. We've also have a couple of milestones. So yeah, this is a milestone. We're going to do the deliverable at the very end. And basically, we've also had a milestone about fair software. I think it's not in the slides. No. And we have also published the assessment framework in a couple of different versions. The last version we've linked in the document. All right, can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So in the last version of the framework, we have the technically oriented aspects, which is fair enablement, quality of the service, open and connectedness, and more socially oriented one, which is user centricity. We used to have here only, instead of transparency and longevity, we used to have trustworthiness, but we've kind of refined it a little bit more. And I think we can define it better by dividing these two. This is another thing that that we're putting together in the last, we've come up with the last version. So transparency, longevity, and ethical and legal issues. These are the things that we're going to go into today and look at one by one. And I think I'm probably done with the first part, am I? So I'm going to hand it over to the ladies. Yes, each of these objectives that we have, each of these, parts of the assessment framework have a high-level objective and more actionable, on the concrete recommendations on how to follow them. So the objectives is the goal, and the recommendations are, we try to make it not too much detailed, but detailed enough for it to be actionable. And we can go to the next slide.
Yes, so the next slide is the workshop activity. So
okay,
we can go. I will continue sharing my screen, and I will introduce to you the activity that we prepared for you on the notes. And for that, I wanted to kind of stop this presentation and go directly to the activity document. So first, I'm going to read what we'll do on the activity. We want to validate the framework. So we'll go through each one of the aspects and each one of the recommendations. We'll try to do it without in a flow, and give you the time to do it also alone, but also together to review the comments that we'll have on the document. And we have 3 questions for you. The first one, is this objective or recommendation relevant for services in a fair ecosystem? The second one, should this recommendation be prioritized in a scale, essential, highly recommended, desired, or redundant? You can just put +1 or 0 or -1 in the table that we've prepared. I'm going to jump to that document in a second. And the third question that we have for you for each one of these recommendations, if you know services examples that already answer this specific recommendation, and if you can add a link to that example. So I'm going to the activity document where you are all, I hope you're all in and you already written yourself down in the participants list. And now one of these, well, the first part is the context, is the change that we did in for the structure of this assessment framework that Sarah already introduced. We changed the trustworthiness aspect to transparency and longevity. And another thing that I wanted to give, kind of take your attention is the fair enablement terminology, where we have augment and facilitate. So you can see that on the document. Afterwards, I will ask all of you to go to this table, which you can access directly when you go here, fair enablement, and we'll start reading. We'll start reading what's in there to validate and see that that we did have the good aspect, or so I'm going to go back here and start with fair enablement. So the objective of fair enablement is the service enables fair data by elevating the fairness of digital objects and or supporting the verification process. Fair enablement is actively driven through the implementation of community-supported standards and interoperability frameworks. So here again, I show you the fair enablement terminology, where in enable we have two levels of augment and facilitate. And I would ask you, I will stay on this page, on this kind of slide while we do the activity, and I will give you 2-3 minutes to go to the table and reread the objective I read to you, and each one of the and we'll look together on each one of the recommendations. Just a moment. Okay, so so can you see the slide well enough? And I'm not going to go back to the GDoc at the moment. I'm going to go.
Excuse me, Morane. Sorry for interrupting. Are we supposed to separately log on the document, or the document? How are we going to be on the same?
So you you go to the document and you do in parallel. You write on the same table. Now I'm in a fair enablement. I'm going to show you. Maybe I should show you on the screen, but you kind of see a +1 appearing in the relevant column. You should go into this table and say, yes, this aspect is, I feel like it's very relevant for a fair for a fair ecosystem. And so you can just go and add a +1 and or -0 or -1 or 0 and kind of comment the objective itself and the wording. I see that we already have a comment on this table. Why do we concentrate only on data? Wouldn't it be better to refer to digital objects, semantic artifacts, laboratory notebooks? There's a lot of examples in this comment. So I agree that this is a good comment, not to specify data, and I would take that as a good suggestion to amend the text. So feel free also to do these types of comments on the text itself to improve the text.
I think we do have a reason though why it's a data services framework and not anything else. And I think that that's because you know, that kind of relates to the what Sarah has mentioned, that this we also looked at, you know, fair for software, but we realized that and there's a whole RDA working group around that, that tries to define fair principles for research software, because you can't just like one-to-one apply the ones for data to other digital objects. So I think there is, activity out there trying to refine fair for more objects than data. And like, so at the moment we're like focusing on data services and research data, because that's what the FAIR principles were designed for, and that's where they are like at this stage kind of applicable, or we feel that they are applicable, and that's what we're trying. Whereas there's still like the ongoing discussion how that then applies to other kinds of digital objects. And once that's like a bit more fleshed out and in a stable set, then I guess it's worth giving this assessment framework another look and see if that can be one-to-one applied to services that support other digital objects. But yeah, there is a reason why at this stage it's like restricted to data, and for some of the recommendations you can just replace data with digital object in general and you will be fine. But it might be like, worth thinking where that is where that is the case, and where that doesn't work. So there's some reasoning behind it. We didn't just make that up, but it's a good point to keep the wider context. Sorry, Moran.
That's good. That's a very good answer. I agree that we don't have already a fair kind of fair principles for other digital objects, and the ones for data are more stable than other. Well, again, a good answer, a good point to raise, and to follow on the comments if you want to comment that. I see that Maggie has her hands up. Can you go ahead?
Yes, I was just a little bit confused about what should go in the priority and the good services examples columns. I had a bit of an audio issue for a while, so I probably missed that.
No worries. I will kind of re-explain that. I feel like being on a table is making it more difficult to kind of answer at the same time. So a priority, I've proposed this kind of scale where it's essential, highly recommended, desired. It's just before the. I'm going to do that exit full screen, and I'm going to show you that it will be easier, and I'm going to try to do kind of more zoomed in for you to see. So just before the table, if it accepts my kind of, no. Okay, just before the table.
If you double click on the page separator, then everything comes together a bit more compactly, and then it's easier to scroll.
Excellent, but I wanted to not to be easy to scroll, just to be easy for you to see it on your screen, because I'm sharing my screen. So if you see in the workshop activity, there's the questions here that I'm highlighting now. And so in the second question, I've proposed the scale, essential, highly recommended, desired, and redundant, because sometimes you can reread the same recommendation in one aspect and in another. You can or think that you are reading the same kind of recommendation. And that's why we want your eyes on it and see if you're seeing that this recommendation is essential or not essential at all, not needed, maybe not needed, should be as also a possibility to add. So
to save us some typing, could I recommend that maybe we can just use either a number or a letter there, because otherwise it's going to be very messy.
Well, I propose to just do a +1, so you can just choose a +1 for it to be prioritized. So you feel that recommendation is more important than others, so just do a +1. And if it's not important, more important, just a 0. And if it's redundant, do a -1. If you want to be more elaborated in this, because this is a fine-grained scale, the one I propose, you can use that and just do a Control-C, Control-V of one of the words, which will not take you a lot of time typing, but you can just do a +1 if you want to type. And Patricia is suggesting in the chat really nicely, H for high, M for medium, and L for low, or maybe R for redundant. And so the third column, the one with the good, in quotes, services examples, would be services that you already know that do those that act the way that we suggest in these recommendations. So if you have a service that you know and you want to kind of suggest us to look at it for this aspect, please put it in the services examples. I've added the good, so it's kind of we don't want to show services that are not good in this part. So I'm going to give you the time. Let's say that we can jump to the other aspect, or should we read the recommendations? I'm sure you can read by yourself the recommendations and have your thoughts on that. But let's maybe take a minute, just a minute or two, to take the time to read the recommendations. It takes time. We have many recommendations there. What do you think, Patricia? Should we jump to the next aspect?
No, I think we can give people like a few more minutes, just because this is the first example, figuring out what they need to do. And then, like, you know, the next ones should be easier.
So if we want to review the recommendations that we have, the first one is in consultation with the target community, identify which metadata schemas, about metadata schemas. And then the second recommendation is engage with both the user community and other service providers to improve interoperability between services. Of particular attention here are authentication and authorization infrastructures, PIDs, and data and metadata encoding specifications. Then we have consider both human and machine access to the service, specifically with a view towards supporting automated pipelines for the verification of digital objects. Use automated tests that show how the service increments fairness of digital objects in a verifiable, measurable, repeatable, and scalable way. Root such tests in community-supported methodologies that measure the fairness of digital objects in an objective way. I see that we already have some examples on the right column, so I'm very happy with your participation and engagement. Thank you very much for that. You should know that after the workshop, we do look at all your comments and we discuss them, and that's why we did change the structure of the previous iteration of the assessment framework. So please continue commenting and adding information on this Google Doc. And if you want to speak up and say something, please raise your hand. We will be happy to hear your thoughts out loud and drive this as a discussion if you have anything else to add. And on that note, I might give the hand to Patricia for the second aspect.
Yeah. So you can basically spend as much time on certain aspects as you would like, and come back in and add more detail if you feel to, but just so we give everyone an overview of all of them. I'll move on to the next one, which is quality of service. And the objective here is that the service is delivered in a reliable, secure, high quality way, consistent with its specifications. Again, feedback is on the same aspects that we've just done for fair enablement. Do you think that this is relevant for services in a fair ecosystem? Then look at the individual recommendations if you feel any of them should be prioritized. And again, if you have good examples of services out there that you're aware of that, you know, do some of these aspects really well, folks are always interested in seeing examples that they can copy. So if you know anything, please please let us know, and we can link that up in the final version. So this is actually something that people can make use of, and that's kind of applicable and useful to people, because that's what we're hoping to achieve here. So again, if you are on the Google Doc, you can go to the
Do you want
next.
me to?
If
Do
you
you
want,
want me to change the view to the Google Doc instead of the presentation?
that might be good. So just, you know, we can have the discussion on top of that while people are typing. And yeah, as before, if you want to comment out loud, feel free to do so. But if you know, you can make all your contributions while typing and leave the talking to me, kind of. So the recommendations we have is that we have that the service has public service level agreements available, and that the service is deployed in a suitable infrastructure and also has operational level agreements for that there are measures in place to prevent, and when they happen, take care of any cyber and other security threats, and that there are regular audits, especially important when you have sensitive data. That there, another recommendation is to have to implement service management processes, to have reliable service delivery, and similar have controlled processes to apply changes to the service and make those transparent. Have testing procedures in place, if that is a point for the service, that it's scalable. Some of these are not always applicable to all services, so we try to phrase the recommendations as widely applicable as possible. Again, if you think some things are too vague or too concrete for certain examples, that's good feedback as well. We try to catch all, and then we're not always aware of everything that's out there. So we have experiences from kind of the services we're involved in, where we see how things fit. But you know, if you have examples where you feel this wouldn't really work, highlighting that is at this stage is really useful as well. And yeah, there. I think like quality of services, I think the aspect with the most recommendations. So apologize if you hear me talking quite a lot here. And they're all like quite closely connected. So we have a recommendation to also implement service management processes to deal with any incidents when they come up. Ideally have a service monitoring system in place, and have a set of metrics that then kind of summarizes or makes these performance aspects transparent. And one of the things that I think came out of one of the last workshops is that when we're talking about a fair ecosystem, your service is you know, hardly standalone, but you're kind of relying on other services that you are working with to work as well to facilitate certain certain aspects of your own service. So service networks and interdependencies is something to be considered as well. And yeah, that probably is the case across all the aspects. So also, if you feel that, you know, some of the recommendations are really good, but might be under, you know, you would put them under a different aspect, that would be useful feedback as well. We had discussions amongst ourselves where we thought that certain things could have gone into, you know, under various headings, and then we put them in one. And so getting feedback from you if a different place would make more sense, again, just put a comment there, and we will pick that up in the next version and hope to make sense of that. I see some +1s, some things that are highlighted as essential, so that's good. Some things that are essential for some kind of services, so that again is an interesting comment, because one of the things we don't do as part of this work is we don't really have a kind of a taxonomy of data services, and, you know, what is a core service, what might not be a core service. And again, it's quite good to highlight that some things are more important to certain services than others. The service area that, like some other parts of FAIR's FAIR are most closely working with are, for example, data repositories. So we have quite some work on getting Core Trust Seal certification for some repositories that we're working with, and then there it's already in the name. So Core Trust Seal again has, like, you know, identified some core aspects of data repositories that they want to see addressed to get certification, and that maps to quite a few of our recommendations here as well. But what this assessment framework is trying to do is actually to go a bit wider than repositories. And Moran has her hand up, which means either my time is up or
No, I just have a question for the audience, because I see some +1s for the quality of service recommendations, and I don't see a -1 or 0. And I was kind of asking myself, if we have only 3 +1s, does it mean that everybody accepts that it's a +1 here, that it's relevant for the having this aspect recommendation in the framework, or that people don't know really how to kind of do a +1 or a 0 or a -1? Because this activity here today is to validate the framework, and we want that, well, we want that information. Is this relevant? Do we need this here? And if you have an objection, you can. Maybe that was an objection. And anyway, if you have any objection or not objection, just kind of wanting to tell us what do you think about this aspect, which is quality of service, and the difficulty of doing something about that. Please go ahead in the document or lively here on the Zoom meeting. I can see some faces, but not everyone. And your comments would be very valuable to us. So again, my question was about the relevance. Are all the kind of recommendation relevant here, or some of these recommendations aren't relevant? What are your thoughts about these recommendations? I have a question here in chat. Revalidating the framework. The framework should complement the FAIR principles, and the trust principles potentially confirm them, not replacement them, just complement or enact them. Maybe I'll give the floor to Patricia about the trust principles, which are more about repositories than what we do. If you want, Patricia.
Yeah, I'm just thinking trust principles. I'm like, I don't think they one-to-one are like matched to core trust seal yet, but yeah, basically it's regarding the validation. It's like, no, we don't want to replace anything that's out there. Like it's basically we want to ideally we map quite well to some of the principles and as I said, the certification frameworks that are out there. So we want to complement them for some of the services that they aren't necessarily covering yet, and yes, basically translate them into maybe some more actionable items for services. I guess that's the right wording, if that makes sense. But if again, if you feel that there's actually like no need for some of this because there's something out there that already covers that is, you know, that is a valid comment. We, for example, amongst ourselves in the group had discussions around the aspect that we are discussing at the moment, like in quality of service, if that's not actually just something that a standard IT service maturity model might address already, and are we just like repeating ourselves here in an area that we're like not experts in? Should we focus on the more the fair aspect of this and point to existing things already? So yeah, Natalie, you have your hand raised, so feel free to comment.
Thank you, Patricia. My question was related to just that. When you instruct us on making our plus ones, our zeros, our minus ones useful to you coming out of today, one of the ideas I had was where we see those strong intersections with the trust principles or with other places, ISO specs, whatever, where these same recommendations are already standards or are already principles defined elsewhere, perhaps that lifts the burden off and you can simply say, this is a recommendation, it's already documented here, therefore we are not doubling down on it because another community has already done that work, potentially the International Standards Organization. So why should we, quote unquote, do it again?
Yeah, if you could highlight those, then that's super useful. We are aware of some of them, and we, you know, but we're not experts in all the things that are out there.
Yeah,
so,
none of us can be. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So please, yeah, pointers like that would be exactly what we want here, because these are a lot of, you know, recommendations, and there's only so much time and work that we can get done in the outstanding time that we have left in FAIR. So it would be good that, you know, we then focus on the areas that folks haven't covered yet. So if you let us know where we basically can ignore things because it's already done, that is ideal. So if you know in some areas, please highlight, and then we can going forward make sure that we focus on the bits that maybe aren't covered that well yet. So that is exactly what we want here. So yes, please. And I think Moran switching across is the sign for me to shut up about quality of service now and get on to open.
That's okay. We had some time on quality of service, and we have now 8 minutes left for the last socially oriented aspect, which is open and connected, which I'll present to you in a second. I just want a quick comment about the trust principles. They are specifically meant for repositories, and we are a task that is specifically not meant for repositories, well, where repositories are included in data services, but our main objective is look at what's ever around as a service that is not data repositories. We have a whole work package working on data repositories, and we are consulting with that work package, with that other work, and also we do know the trust principles, and as Patricia said, there's some parallel between the principles and what we did with the assessment framework. We wanted a more global view of services, any service, not just the one that holds data, which is a data repository. So that I really wanted to mention that. So with that, I'm going to continue with open and connected. So maybe some of you already went to the table to start the activity, but I will read to you the objective of open and connected aspect, which is the service is operated in a low barrier and inclusive way, seeking integrations and connection with other services, and championing principles of openness consistent with open science and open research. And here again, we'll ask you 3 questions with this table. The one, is this objective and the recommendations below it are relevant for services in a fair ecosystem? Should this recommendation be prioritized? Well, for each one of the recommendation, how would you prioritize each one of these recommendations in a high, medium, or low scale? And do you know services examples that already answers this specific recommendation? So I'm going to do again what I did before, to the activity and see if you're already there. And some of you are there, and I'm very glad to see you there, to see you working. I know it's a lot of work in a workshop to kind of read and comment and not just listen to a presentation. So thank you again for your engagement. And I'm going to go a little bit through these recommendations in the 5 minutes we have. And after that, we'll have a short break. So let's see what we have. First recommendation is publish a clear, inclusive, and non-discriminatory licenses and or term of use to enable wider access to the service. Second one, provide guidance about the service licensing to better understand the limitations in usage. Seek integration with other services. I see already we have a comment from Maggie. Maggie, if you want to do this comment, to the whole everybody, I'm glad to give you the floor to comment these seek integrations.
No, I just wanted to point out this obvious point that if you build one service on another service and then the basic underlying service suddenly changes or disappears or something happens to it, then the all on top services are also going to fail. So it's very important, I think, here also to have this if you have chains of services, that all of that is covered by these SLAs, etc., that you mentioned earlier, so that you don't leave anyone high and dry suddenly. And this may not always be completely clear to the further down you go or up, depending on how you define it. I mean, you have some core services, maybe from the EOSC, then you could have other semi-core services building on, or tools building on that. But then you start having communities building services, or maybe even research groups setting up services, which may or may not be planned to be sustainable for a very long time. And then if that is not always clear exactly what the conditions are at each step, then we risk failure and disappointment and disenchantment and all of this.
I completely agree with your comment. And now I have a question for you. Do you think that is something that we should keep in open and connected, or in another aspect? Is it something that you feel that is about these connections and should be here?
It sort of fits in several places, I think, which is always difficult, isn't it? Because this is really about the connectivity, but its underlying basis maybe belongs to sustainability or longevity and all of these things, as well as what we just talked about before with the, what was that called now? Quality of service. So,
Yes. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you. So I'm going to continue with the recommendations. We have a few more. Adopt well-documented and community-supported open standards and specifications, in particular for APIs and other interfaces to better understand the server's usage. Make the service and all documentation available online through URLs that are fully qualified domain names and assign PIDs wherever applicable. Offer the service with the lowest possible entry barrier for end users, which does not preclude monetization or cost recovery models. Sorry about that. Then we have 3 recommendations left and 2 minutes to go. So go ahead, please. If you have some kind of examples to put in the table, I will really appreciate that. I see that we don't have a lot of examples. So let's see what we have next. Use community-supported PIDs to integrate with other services. Keep data, metadata, and PIDs tightly connected. Consider implementing the FAIR digital object model to enable interoperability with other data services. Where possible, make any source code that is used to run the service available under a common open source license. Seek inclusion in relevant service catalogs, ideally obtaining and using a PID for the service. So that's for this aspect, open and connected. And I was wrong before I said socially oriented, and we are in the technically oriented part of the session. And just after our break, we will go into depth with the socially oriented aspects. So I'll give you another minute to answer here. And if you have something to say also about open and connected aspect, or show us an example or provide us in the table an example, I would be very glad to see. I see that there's a lot of high prioritization. I don't see a low in open and connected. Everything is very important. Don't forget to say it's slow. Not saying it doesn't mean you think it's slow. So if you have this feeling that it's redundant or low, please go ahead and provide this comment in the activity document. Okay, so I'm going to, because it's 4 and we have proposed, I will thank you, Natalie, for being here, and I would propose to go to our break as we suggested it at 4, and for 5 minutes you can still comment the document and tell us that what you have in mind for the open and connected or other aspects. You can go ahead and start already the technically oriented aspect, and we'll give you a few minutes off this to have a coffee break or just a short break to kind of ease up your eyes and ears. So let's meet again in 5 minutes, which will be 06 and not 05. So see you at 06.
User centricity has the objective that the service is managed so that it serves the goals of the user community, and those might be changing or still evolving. And it maximizes the usability for the users while minimizing the burden on them. And again, we ask you to kind of give us an indication of how relevant you think the individual recommendations and the overall objective is. And like any priorities that you want to assign on to certain recommendations, plus examples if they are available. User centricity, I think last time was quite a popular thing to talk about. So I think I hope that you have opinions here as well. Moran, I don't know if you want to switch over into the Google Doc so I can go through some of the individual recommendations. So what came out from previous discussions is that like they're somehow ranked by previous priority. So it's going to be interesting to see if that still is the right one for your feeling. One of the most popular recommendations last time was to invest in user training and outreach activities to help users with the service and how to use it. And that kind of, there's a dependency here that means that you have to ensure that you actually have support staff available to do that, because otherwise it's unclear who's doing all that user training and outreach. And to make sure you address those needs, the next recommendation is that you actually determine and monitor your target user community to understand which of their needs you address, and what their expectations are and how they might change, and how that might affect how you adjust the service. Oh, we have a +1 to the overall objective with a question mark. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's mine, because I feel like nobody's kind of involved on this aspect, and I was kind of asking myself, if people here feel that user centricity isn't relevant, because there were a lot of +1 on the other aspects before, and maybe people just didn't come back from the break because they're still on break, and they will come back later and say that whatever they feel about user centricity. And I'm kind of wondering if user centricity is an important aspect to have services in the FAIR ecosystem. Maybe we can open this as a debate if people are not inclined to answer on the document.
Yeah. I quite think like, well, we can debate amongst ourselves as long as no one else jumps in, but I think it's quite important, seeing as the FAIR aspects are quite clearly machine and human focused. So I think the fact that the human is in there, and in the case of data services, that is the end user, I think they need some consideration.
But is it important for FAIR? Because FAIR is more an actionable, kind of a machine actionable.
No, I think it's both. All the recommendations are phrased to be both machine
here,
readable.
yes.
No, also in the principles.
In the principles, okay. Machine
Yeah.
readable,
So I think we have the human in there. I guess the question is like, are the users addressed sufficiently in the focus for the FAIR enablement, that you don't need to separate that out.
Maybe the human user is not so immediately evident as the more machine users in a way. That's why it gets this attention.
I guess a comment on that is you need to train the humans in how to train their machines to use this, don't you? Although we haven't quite got to the point where machines can read user documentation and know how to.
It would be nice if they could write the documentation. Like, I'm waiting for the point where the machine writes the documentation for us.
But that's a good comment about training. Exactly, the humans are the one getting the training, so it's important to have the humans in the loop, and not only the services as a amorphic kind of black box of things that interact data.
Right.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
So I suppose, I mean, just a general question. I'm looked at all the sections so far, and they're all good stuff. And I come from a long-established data repository, and I'm looking at this, and I put a +1, and I think, if someone challenged us on this, could we say we do these things? And pretty much mostly we can. But it does, I suppose, at the back of my mind is the question is gonna. Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a good set of criteria here, and you're looking for that sort of endorsement from the community. And apologies if you did say this up front. I kind of did. I didn't catch everything at the start. But what next? What are you going to do once you've got them endorsed? Who's going to use this document, and what are they going to use it for?
That's the question that we kind of have in the end. Is like, how would you like to use that? And I think, like, the fact that you just mentioned that you tick most of these boxes, you kind of probably, without wanting to, might have volunteered yourself as a case study for an application here, if you'd be interested. But it's like, yeah, it is. That is one of the questions, and that's also something that we're kind of picking up with EOS governance. Is like, what do they actually, do they want this to assess things that services that are part of EOS, or
And the reason I think we can tick those boxes is because we have compared to lots of repositories, not necessarily compared to bigger, commercial organizations, but we have a team of software developers. We have a sort of systems team who are worrying about all these sorts of things. So just going back, I think when you talk about testing and stuff like that, this is what we've got developers doing, working out all the ways to automate this all of the time. So it's not a problem, I guess. And I suppose you look at the key infrastructure providers like Crossref, DataSite, etc. You get the sense that they're working to those principles. But what happens when you start going out into more academic circles where people may aspire to do those things, but may not have the resources to do all of them?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think we also had one of the ideas was to kind of have people given an indication of like how difficult it would be for some of these other services to actually take the recommendation and put into action. Because while you might agree that this is all like good stuff, if you don't have the resources and no one is giving you money to do it, the recommendations and the thinking behind it can be as useful and good as you want. You're not going to get around to doing it necessarily. So,
and that's actually more often the case. And a lot of when we're talking about research data management, a lot more often the case, it could be that you actually don't have the resources.
But on your point about, if you want to run this against CCDC, then you are more than welcome. Then, but definitely be open to that.
Yeah, that's good to know, because I think we might get to the stage where we need to like run this through a service to actually see if it's useful and if this is something that people want to use. So that's nice of you to offer, and we might get back on you on that. You can also make sure it's not that painful to do. How are we on time?
I think we need to move.
Jump on transparency, seeing as people are just coming back, and you can always put more +1s in around the user centricity, if that's
okay. Yes, thank you, Patricia. I'm going to, the next aspect we're looking into is transparency. And the previous version, I don't know how many people we have in common between the two webinars, but we did not have this one. We had transparency and longevity as one, as trustworthiness, and we kind of further granulated it into two because it seemed to be a nice distinction and better defined this way. Actually, this is another thing you can give your opinion on, but we kind of liked it. It made sense to us. So the idea is a service provider communicates clearly and transparently with its users. Again, we're going to go into the objectives of this one a little bit and see if is this recommendation relevant for your services. And so yeah, whether it's relevant for your services and whether you see it as important. And do you think it should be each of the recommendations should be prioritized? You can put your scores there, and also if you have any examples that are a good example for any of the recommendation, we would be very happy to hear. So just give you a moment to.
You have it on the presentation screen.
Yeah, just a moment to read.
But it's good to give people time
Yeah,
to read
just
them by
a couple of
themselves.
I think because I feel like if I talk in on a stream that's non-ending, then maybe it's okay. Yeah. So yeah, the first recommendation is to clearly communicate the service's core value proposition and any pertinent technical or not technical features, as well as limitations. So be clear about what the service can do and not do, actually. Be clear about and transparent about the mission of the organization, the business model, what kind of organization it is legally, what user communication, what user communities are the targeted audience, and also about the cost models, the business model, and what if there's a profit, if it's nonprofit, how it all works. So this is right on the organizational level. So for services that are meant to preserve research objects over a longer period of time, for instance, data repositories, say how long you expect this, to expect the data to be on the service. So how long we can ensure that the data will be preserved, and give a plan, a contingency plan. So how a preservation plan. This is something that actually we discussed a bit between ourselves. So is this necessary for all services? Do we need? Does this time frame need to be a longer time frame for more? Or do we have services that just don't really need to do this? So I mean, how relevant do you think this is? And if you have any examples about it. For instance, for a repository, it's very clear, but we talked among ourselves about the example of for instance a service that mints PIDs. Does it need to have what kind of contingency plan do we need to have for something like that? Somebody has the PID. I was saying the cost, could we transfer it as a separate aspect?
Yeah, I don't know if your PID example is the best one of something that's different from a repository, because obviously they've got all the metadata and what have you, which it's quite important that they preserve. So in a way they are a repository. But I think, yeah, it is. I've been looking at this very much through the lens of a repository, but what does it mean? Some of these mean if it is literally a service that doesn't have data underpinning it, but I'm not sure what a good example of that is.
Well, the PID service can be one that doesn't do the hosting. It just gives you a prefix and you mint it.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I know they're kind of tightly entangled, so it's hard to. It was hard to come up with examples, to be honest. Yeah. So yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this fits here, but it's, you know, if it's sort of like an API that does something, right, where you take the data to it and it spits it back, if you're going to integrate that in your kind of overall workflow, you don't want it disappearing suddenly. And, you know, if it does disappear, you want to hopefully be able to go and find where it's moved to its backup location.
Yeah. Yeah, in most cases, it seems like this is the situation where you do want to be able to know what comes of the service afterwards. Okay, so we also want to implement a transparent governance structure that includes representation of the services target users community. So the users have a say in how it's governed. How and the next recommendation says to be clear about how the service implements community standards. So I think this kind of also goes hand in hand with the previous one. Well, with just the whole thing about knowing the community and having a good relationship and being in contact with them. I see that. Okay, the idea of having the cost as a separate aspect. Moran is asking, what would you call it, Andre? Okay. Okay. So Andre is suggesting financial legal transparency separately. Financial transparency gathers many specific sub aspects such as profit definition. Do you want to address this yourself, Andre?
Sorry?
Do you want to address this yourself or elaborate on it?
Well, now I cannot to address it by myself, so it's just a suggestion and opinion.
Yeah, we do have a legal and ethical. So you're saying financial and legal. So this is also interesting. And I mean,
yes,
yeah.
I consider them as different aspects because, for example, if you define the profit, it could be both material and non-material profit. It's very difficult to define. So some business model could include both aspects, but some business model could not include one of these.
Yeah, that's true.
There's also the question of governance that's here in transparency, but we don't have a separate aspect for governance. So maybe that should be the direction of this type of new name.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. So for the governance, I think it's too closely connected with the definition of the service.
Right.
So the governance should be defined as long with the service.
Okay, I'll note that. Thank you for that comment. I see that we need maybe to jump to the next aspect. Did we?
Okay, the last one would be seek to attain certification where relevant community endorsed certification mechanisms exist. So if we have, well, again, the example of repositories are usually easy, a core trust seal or something like that. Seek to attain that. Yes, you're right. We have to jump to the next one.
We have to. No, we don't have to, but we should jump.
If we
so
want
I'm going to do it. Exactly. So we are with transparency, and now we're going to longevity, which is the other side of trustworthiness, the older trustworthiness aspect. Here, the objective is as following: the service provider designs the service with a time frame for that maintenance and sustainability of the service in mind, and implements measures accordingly, considering the researcher's necessity for reproducible research. And we, again, have the same questions about relevance, prioritization, and some examples. I'm going to give you a few minutes with the document without my commenting, and let you read the recommendations and the objective again, maybe, because I think that wording, we should kind of amend a little bit the wording of the objective. So you know, it's very recent, this objective. So if you have any comments on the wording, on improving the wording, don't hesitate giving us comments also on that, and not only about substantial comments as you already done during this workshop. I think the copy of the objective maybe was a bit different, but here I won't read it again. You can read the objective on the in the table and see if you have some improvements to bring to it. I will start reading the recommendation. We don't have a lot of recommendation on longevity, but we would like your opinion about that, because we had a lively discussion if services should be considered as long-term services, and our wishful thinking is that all services will stay up forever. And so there's the question of defining a time frame and maintaining and sustaining the service for this time frame or beyond, because some services are needed for reproducibility. That's a thing to take into account when using a service, and when verifying, if we can say that, for a service, making it kind of answering the fair questions with the service. So let me go over the recommendations. Take reasonable measures to ensure a sustainable long-term operation, including both financial and organizational aspects. Aim to reduce long-term operational dependencies on short-lived project funding. If available, provide clear information to indicate how long the service will minimally be available and maintained. And as we know, we do think, I think that most services think that they will stay as long as possible, and the reality is a bit different than what we expect when we create a service. So there's the question of how long we should, how to kind of ensure this longevity with these recommendations. Next, implement technical measures to safeguard the continuity of the service and the longevity and integrity of any metadata or data that is stored as part of the service. This includes keeping backups on independent systems, implementing failover mechanisms, and exercising proper lifecycle service management. I see a lot of +1 on this one, more than before. So that's a kind of maybe a more important recommendation for longevity. And also a high in a prioritization. So here we have I see 3 recommendations, and all recommendations are high. We don't have high, medium, and low. That's interesting. I also noticed that we don't have a lot of low in general. Everything is very, very important. So that's good that we identify all the important items. Maybe there are some additional things that we need to keep in mind that are not as important as the rest, but are desired. And if you have ideas for these desired recommendation, which are not highly important, please take comment on that. You have some place on the document to add additional recommendations. And the last one we have, ensure that the service provider organization has sufficient staff with knowledge to operate the service now and in the future. And I'm surprised you have it as a high. So if one of the hi people, well, people that commented hi on this recommendation can speak up and say why the training is important. I think if someone wants to jump in, you can just unmute yourself and say something. If you don't want to jump in, that's okay. I'm not forcing here anybody. We can give you a little more time. I see that there's no other comments on the longevity, and maybe we can continue and jump to the last aspect we have.
You meant the last recommendation, Morana, for this one about staff that we were not so sure about.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I read it and nobody wants to jump in. So I think that if nobody's, well, if you want to continue putting opinions and examples on longevity, you can. But I was really talking about jumping into the new aspect, which is ethical and legal.
Yeah.
So last call for longevity. Once.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm curious as to why you're surprised that you don't need enough staff to maintain the service.
I'm surprised because I wouldn't say it's kind of well, it's important, but I won't say it's essential. So for me, it would be a medium or a low in a recommendation. I do think that there's a need for staff to maintain the operation, but in the longevity, the plan for the maintenance of the service, I would say more important. And I gradually put that as more important than having the staff. But maybe you have the other way around and say, if without the staff, you cannot execute the plan. So
I saw it differently. I actually saw this one, maybe we could be merged into the first one because it says take reasonable measures to ensure a sustainable long-term operation, including both financial and organization. I would have thought, okay, maybe staff goes into that. That's why I was kind of hesitant about this one.
Okay. And I think you've got an important word, which is sufficient staff. So
sufficient,
which could change over time.
Exactly, right.
No, I think we're going to keep it now. Everybody is really like, it seems like this one.
Yeah.
Again, I think it depends what you're going to do with this, because these are all good considerations to think about. And are they prompts or are they boxes that you have to tick?
So I can conclude that we can jump to the last aspect on our framework, assessment framework. So we are on time, so time is good, comments are good, engagement is good. Let's go to the last one. I'm going to give the floor to Patricia. Would you do the last one? Thanks.
We're gonna wrap up with ethical and legal, and I think some people have read ahead already, so that's good. So objective for this one is basically that the service complies with all applicable legal and ethical guidelines, and again, does that in a transparent and auditable way. I think transparency, we've given it its own aspect, but it really plays into most of them, that if you do things that, there should be a way for people to somehow see what you're doing. So again, we're looking at relevancy, priorities, and any good examples if you have those. And we can almost go into the recommendations directly. And I see most of them have gotten +1s and high priorities. So I think that's a good sign for us that the bits that people really think were needed, we've have gotten rid of in the various iterations. I think so. Recommendations on ethical and legal are to take reasonable measures to manage the intellectual property rights of data producers, to have and have that publicly available, a code of conduct that you also adhere to and follow up on, that you've basically agreed with your community. taking reasonable measures to ensure that the data is handled in compliance with any disciplinary and ethical norms, and again, that any specific licenses that you then apply to the data are defined and respected as much as follow up, as much as possible to be followed up. Again, on any specific data usage conditions or access licenses that you have, like have that clearly available in a user-friendly way. And Moran is kindly putting an example from her own service in there. If anyone wants to see what that looks like. Maintain a publicly available privacy policy. I think that at least in most European countries is actually just like what you legally have to do to not get shut down as a website. So that's, well, sounds like a no-brainer, but it's still good to state in the list of recommendations of some things to check off. Have a clear communicated contact address for any security issues or privacy breaches or contact information. And ideally that should go to not only one people, but a team of folks that is trained in being able to address that. And then again, the last point is for most of the European countries, actually just an implementation of existing legislation around audible measures to ensure that you're respecting user privacy and dealing with sensitive data accordingly. Especially like GDPR has focused some attention to that in the last few years and forced many institutions and services to actually document what they're doing, rethink responsibilities, and make that transparent. So that is just, again, underlining that aspect. And I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
Thank you. Yes, Joseph. I just want to. I've gone through the process, and I had you at one point say everything is looking +1 and highly prioritized. Of course, it made me kept looking out for anything I could place otherwise. A few places I put medium. But one thing I can say is that this being a second level of exercise that we're doing, I think you've done quite a good job in the previous case. That's my comment. Everything that I've looked through, the aspects that and the objectives and the recommendations, they're fairly strong. I'm speaking from a computer science, IT expert point of view, and also as someone who's been looking at policies, open science, and open data. What I would say is that in order to, the priorities would make it easier if you are prioritizing within a given aspect, the recommendations that are given. That can be easily, we can easily rate others higher than others. But if you are looking at just one particular recommendation on its own, it becomes very difficult to say it's low with respect to what. You know, you have to compare with respect to other recommendations. It will, among those recommendations, some of them are more in my view, highly prioritized than others. Maybe that level of sensitivity can be something to consider if you're going to another level of filtering to avoid getting, because what we are seeing is we are not able to resolve and bring out the sensitivity the organizers kind of were expecting to see a +1, a 0, a -1 someplace. That can be done in the column of priority if the recommendations are put on one scale and someone now tries going forward, now that they look all very high, you can resolve them in the next level by looking at it in that way. That's just my suggestion.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
comment.
Yeah, that is good input, I would say. And that is kind of also what we wanted, is like, you know, to actually highlight the bits where it's like, you know, might be a little bit more work needed. So, and thank you to everyone who has, like, you know, commented on the document and provided input so far. I think we're kind of getting to the end of the individual recommendations. So the next point would be a bit that the question that some of you have raised already is like, you know, what can this be useful for, and what do you want to do with it? And I guess we hand that question back to you. Is like, you know, is this like as a you know, an interesting document to read, where you read through and say like, yeah, that makes sense, and my service ticks most of these boxes, or where do you see this as a useful thing for your service, for you to take away? And if you have any feedback, again, there's a table in the document where you can let us know, or you can tell us here or in the chat. I think the thing that we agreed already is like, we don't need another certification mechanism. so I think that's yeah, that's quite become quite clear. But I guess, yeah, the question is like an additional list of recommendations of much use, or, and if it is, then, you know, what are we missing? Is it things like case studies, like, you know, like running this through with one example and see how one service ticks most of these boxes? That would make this useful. Basically, what can we do in the next step that takes this from a nice looking Google document that has good recommendations in it to something a bit more useful? Ian, go for it.
Yeah, I'm pondering a little bit, so I'll start speaking and see what comes out. I think examples would be good. I think bearing in mind what the response has been throughout this process to, aren't you just reinventing Core Trust Seal? And I think you've been consistent in the response that it's not just repositories you're doing this for, it's for services. I think, yeah, maybe use a repository as an example, but maybe a couple of repositories of different types. But what are those additional services that perhaps aren't covered by Core Trust Seal? Maybe just, I guess there could be questions about, is there anything in there that Core Trust Seal doesn't cover? But my sense is, having been involved in both reviewing and applying for Core Trust Seal, yeah, it's a nice complement, but it reinforces rather than adds anything that you probably wouldn't be looking for in Core Trust Seal. From a repository perspective, I think that's the key thing. But I haven't done a sort of detailed sort of comparison to the different criteria and the recommendations within them. I suppose my question is, you mentioned in the context of this EOSC, and I suppose this is where I'm still interested in this because, you know, I hear about things like EOSC rules of engagement and things like this. And I suppose, I guess the question I'd bounce back is, what was the sort of motivation for this in that broader context?
It was that it kind of came out of the motivation to contribute to the work that EOSC is doing, and we fed the first draft into one of the EOSC working groups, and I kind of forgot which one exactly it was. Definitely we into some of the fair related ones and some of the other ones. So kind of the some of the EOSC reports that came out of that last round of working groups built on one of the previous versions. And I think one of the things on our to-do list is basically, once EOSC has figured out its new governance structure, to engage again and say, basically, what do you want from us? Is this good enough? Are you looking for something else? Yeah, just to make sure that, you know, this is actually useful and ideally gets picked up by someone. So we're checking in with some people there, but while they are still figuring out their official structure, it's kind of difficult to understand what the official way into supporting EOSC is. But that is the idea, and that is where this comes from. It's basically trying to enact one of the recommendations in the Turning Fair into Reality report, and to support EOSC and around that. And yeah, go for
Okay.
it. I'm out of words.
It's okay. I think, yeah, just a general reflection on it as well, then. I think it conveys an aspiration towards professionalization of the services that might be kind of assessed against this. And I think, you know, again, it comes back to some of the things you've teased out around the testing and the monitoring and all that sort of thing. And, you know, that's where there might be some differences in emphasis in terms of how the guidance is written between what you've got here and other certification methods. And I think that's good. And I think, you know, EOSC is obviously looking to the long term, and therefore the services that are going to kind of contribute it need to be on that professional footing. Again, I'll echo the comment that I made earlier about how it might play out depending on how established and how well supported and well funded a particular service is. And that may inform a little bit your second column of desirable, must have, etc. If you want to make it so that recognized services that perhaps have been around and are used, and you would want to be part of EOSC, are falling short, well, maybe those are the things where there's room for improvement, and they're not necessarily now, but are maybe something that you ask organizations to aspire to.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, I think as Patricia pointed out, it's pretty difficult it's also pretty difficult with all the different projects and the different working groups and everything, to make sure that everybody knows what's going on where, and that there's less overlaps in the work that's done. So we try to get this across as much as we can, but on the other hand, at this point, this is a good chance for you to you know, the ball is in your on your side to just tell us what you would like to see that's not here.
I think the only other thing I'd add, though, is I'm conscious, looking at the attendance list, that if we take out the co-hosts, there's only 4 or 5 of us left, and you might need to reflect on whether there needs to be another round of wider community consultation.
No, but I mean, it was also a long day at the end of a long day. So we try to get it in the afternoon so folks from the other side of the ocean can also participate.
Okay.
And I think
Yeah, but I
we've
guess
got a lot of good feedback, I think.
There will be a community review, so it's
Yeah.
not the last chance
No,
to
no.
kind of
No,
give
no.
feedback. But it's this is well, maybe Sarah, you say a few words about that, but that's a
Yeah.
step towards the
No, this
final.
is complementary. That's true. So yeah, we can, as I am pointed out, we don't have that many actually people still hanging around, and maybe we can just go to the last. So point out a little bit what the next steps are that we're going to after this workshop, we're going to finalize the framework and get external expert review. And then we're going to get internal reviews from the communities, and then external internal reviews from the Fair is Fair project, different working groups. And by the end of the summer, hopefully we finalize our deliverable. So there's still actually, if you know of anybody or anybody here wants to, please get in touch with us. And there's still some time to improve. And I think at this point we can thank everybody for participating. I think we already thanked everybody who left, and of course thank all of our co-contributors and previous contributors. There's a lot of effort gone into the work. So have a nice, I think everybody left though. I'm not sure if it's afternoon for everyone, but have a nice rest of the day, afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you for participating. And yeah, also thanks for Morana and Patricia, put a lot of very good work into this. And good afternoon. Are they still recording us?
Thank you.
Thank you.